Hello, welcome to the DRH show. Today I'm joined by a conservative activist from Canada, and he's also a mental health advocate. Mattias Vanderley, thanks for joining me.
For having me. It's great to
Great
be
to
here.
have great to have you here, Matthias, and thank you for sparing me a chunk of your time. I know you're extremely busy, but let's kick this off with you telling us your background and your trajectory in life and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Yes, so I am a 21-year-old student in London, Ontario, in Canada. I am the youngest Conservative candidate of record from the last election, so I was the youngest one we ran. And generally, my background is small business. So my family was a group of landscapers, college education, not university, but very hardworking and knew how to save our money. And that's really what drew us initially into the Conservative Party, into the Conservative cause, was fiscal concern. And so seeing all this money being spent drew me into running in the federal election for Team O'Toole against Team Trudeau. And it was a great experience. I got to meet a lot of people, got to learn a lot of things, including the vastness of the concerns surrounding mental health. And that's really where my concern for mental health grew, because I saw just how large the impact it was having on Canada and Canadians as a whole. It was vast and still is vast. And so as a student, I tried to learn as much as I can. I would read, listen to podcasts, go to little webinars, go to in-person events when they were possible here in Canada and are becoming even more prevalent due to the easing of restrictions and the allowance for such events now at universities specifically. And what I learned is that the economy, mental health are intertwined. You can't have a strong economy, a strong balanced budget, without a strong population that are sure of themselves and healthy physically and mentally. And so I took what I learned from business, from history, and from law and tried to apply it in activism in many ways I can. So I signed up for about, I want to say 6 charities I'm a part of right now across Canada. And all of them have a focus on mental health, whether it be from homelessness to endangerment of young girls through trafficking. They all have intertwinement with mental health in some way or another. And so I would sum up my background as a student of everything, specifically learning about mental health at this point in time and how we can fix it.
Now, Matthias, you've mentioned that one of the things that really underpins what you do, whether as a student or as an activist, is mental health. But where does that passion I'm doing something for mental health, where does that come from? Do you have lived experience of mental health, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, that's a great question. So first of all, I personally have never had to really struggle with it. I come from a very privileged background and very privileged, I would say, the roll of the dice that I personally never had to deal with it. But during the election, I had the opportunity to meet about 20,000 people going door to door trying to convince them to vote Conservative. And mental health consistently came up. And I got to hear from them the impact it had on their lives. The mental health challenges that follow abusive relationship, abusive lifestyle, from parenting, neglect, or mental health breakdown due to overworking. I mean, there are so many things that fall under the net of mental health. Vast majority of them are difficult to control. They come from outside factors. And so I saw that none of them knew how to manage it. There had been no education on how to manage it. There had been no real supports in the government how to manage it. I mean, there are things like you get a free therapy session through certain government programs, stuff like that, but more mouth service and any real tangible, palatable action. And so I'd say my passion comes for it not from personal experience, but from other people's personal experience with it, from seeing how it affected them and how it continues to affect them. So trying to do what I can to help them. Compassion is really how to sum it up.
Absolutely. Now, Matthias, you're based in Canada, and I was just wondering if there's a significant difference between Canada and Britain in relation to, the mental health landscape. Because one of the most commonly quoted statistics here is that 1 in 4 people will experience a mental health problem of some kind every year. So is that also the kind of of situation when it comes to mental health in Canada, as far as you know, even though even if you're not familiar with the statistics, but from a personal standpoint, would you say it's about the same?
Well, I would say the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree, and Canada ultimately is that apple that fell away from England, the United Kingdom, excuse me, not that long ago. So the similarities are very stark. I mean, it's the same issues. It's the same issues with social media. It's the same issues with the culture. It's the same issues, broadly speaking. There are, of course, differences in government, but even then, due to our alliances and the way our governments are set up, they're very similar. And so very similar difficulties seen here. But I would say 1 in 4 doesn't exactly do it justice here in Canada, because the thing with England and the United Kingdom is it's very tightly knit. I mean, everyone's very close together. Getting from one place to another is very easy, and generally speaking, it's not that hard to meet other people. The same is not true for places here in Canada, such as Nunavut, where depression and a pandemic of suicide dominates up north because they have been ignored and they're essentially cut off from the rest of society up there. And it's a beautiful place, but they need help. And so far, what they've received from the government is nothing. They're being ignored, they're being abandoned. And so for certain areas in this country, it's not 1 in 4. I would say it's even higher, to 50%. And that's not a ludicrous number to bring up, because I'm pretty sure it's even higher in places such as the Yukon and Nunavut, in Iqaluit area. It's severe in the north. It is severe due to government ignoring them for so long. So it's tough. But I would say this, the solutions that work in the United Kingdom and work in Canada are the same. I mean, there are very simple solutions government can take. Government will never be able to solve the issue. I mean, they can barely solve their own issue, so let alone the mental health crisis, but they can aid. They can help. And so there are steps, I believe, that government can take in both the United Kingdom and in Canada that would work in both places quite well.
And I think one of those steps is that, young adults such as yourself is getting involved when it comes to raising awareness and doing their own mental health advocacy. And in fact, Mattias, as I was doing my research in preparation for this interview, I came across one of your videos that you did for Secure the Future. So for anyone who hasn't come across that video, could you tell us more about this and what's the overarching message of your video?
Yes, so Secure the Future. It was part of our 5-point plan, and one of the major points on there was mental health. And that was a refreshing thing to see. And it was a major concern for our party, and it was the only party that made that a #1 priority. It was like the top 5 highest among equal concerns, if you want to call it that. And we realized that, and I realized that, if people weren't healthy, how on earth could the country be healthy? Because the country is ultimately made up of people. And so having people who are of a strong mental state is key for a strong state. And that video, generally speaking, outlines something that's very prominent for my generation. I mean, as the youngest candidate, I recognize to secure the future, you literally have to secure the future. The youth are the future. And they're not secure right now. The mental health crisis disproportionately affects my generation. Now, you could blame things from social media to parenting to culture. There are many things you can blame, but there is one thing that all people will agree upon, is that it's a problem that has not been addressed. Now, of course, before you can address a problem, you have to know what the problem is specifically, rather than just knowing there is a problem. But that's where we are beginning to start. We're beginning to see that change, that progress across the Western world of trying to focus on mental health as a health issue and not something you just, air quotes, man up and deal with yourself. And so that video was something that I felt was very important, and something that was very important for other candidates to do as well, as we had law candidates make similar videos, that focusing on mental health as an equal priority to economic, which is, of course, the number one concern for any conservative party is, of course, a balanced budget. But we put mental health as the equivalent because we realized it is equivalent. It's just as important, and in my opinion, arguably more so. Can't have a strong economy without a strong population.
Now, for anyone who wants to listen to that video or watch that video, rather, I'll put the link on the description also. They can see it from themselves. Now, those are really interesting points that you've put forward, Mattias. But I just want to touch upon one of the points that you've alluded to. You said that it's not just all about manning up. Why do you say so? What's the harm of just being resilient or just be manning up when it comes to mental health?
So the main issue with that is you can only go so far. I mean, people have their limits. I mean, people can be very tough. They can be very resilient. They can be very strong. I mean, strong people existed all the time. I mean, if you look at, say, the people in Ukraine, those are strong people. They're going through a traumatic event right now. Those are strong people. They have no choice but to rely upon themselves, their individual strength. But that can only go so far. And the issue is with, say, and I'm not equating their suffering to that of the Western world. I mean, the Ukrainians are really suffering right now. But I am saying that you see a difficulty that affects the mind in a similar scale of the long, drawn-out isolation caused by, say, the pandemic, staying at home, not being able to see people. You slowly are worn down. It's like a siege of the mind. You slowly are broken down. And at some point you need help. And that's one of the major issues I think government can help with. One of the few ones is that people don't know to ask for help. They're taught from a young age, specifically men as well, to rely upon themselves. It can only go so far. Everyone has their limit. And once you reach that limit and cross that limit, and you don't know how to ask for help or feel you need to ask for help, you're in dangerous water. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're at risk of taking their lives, although that is possible. It may mean that you may slowly forget who you are as a person. You may begin to break down. You may begin to fail at work. You may begin to fail in your marriage. You may begin to fail in your relationship. And you keep on thinking, I just need to man up. I just need to man up. I need to keep on taking control of the situation. At some point, that's going to falter, and it is going to fail. Because at the end of the day, we're just people. We're not Spartans, at least all of us. We're not the elite heroes we see in those movies who can handle the most tough of the tough. We're just people. And that's something that governments need to recognize, is that people have their limit and they need a helping hand.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we have to realize here is there's also striking a balance. You don't have to display weakness all of the time, and you don't have to, for lack of better term, I suppose, man up all the time. You just have to acknowledge your, invisibility, your being human, your limitations. I just want to pick up one of the points that you've also mentioned earlier, because earlier you mentioned that economy is intertwined with mental health. Would you like to expand more on that? Because, if we go by research, they would say that poorer countries, they tend to be more religious, they tend to be more spiritual. And there are hosts of research that says those who are religious, those who are spiritual, it contributes to a positive mental well-being. So would you like to, cite some specific examples on how this is intertwined with mental health?
Yes. So, I mean, there is, of course, the argument that the breakdown of religion causes the breakdown of society. There might be some truth to that, as we see a lot more, I want to say, community commitment amongst places that are intertwined with religion. I mean, we see this a lot in, say, places like, South Africa or West Africa, where there is a strong either Islamic or Christian community, and people come together in a lot more stronger fashion around said religion, because religion is a great tying together. It gives you a great safety net for you as a person, physically and mentally, because it gives you that assurance that you're not alone, you're not fighting through this alone, and that there's someone on your side and there's a God on your side. That is a massive boon for mental health. I mean, there's no getting around that. But specifically in terms of the economic side, the main issue we've seen here is a role that religion has played in the West, and it's beginning to lose, is that in the States, 70% of charities and outreach is done by Christian churches. That goodwill and compassion came from a place of religion that is now degrading. And interestingly enough, although politically people who are left will vote for government aid and people who are on the right will vote for cutting government aid to the poor, in the individual level, it's reversed. Liberals are less likely to give money to people who are poor and in need. But conservatives are far more likely because they're more or less likely to be religious and have that religious belief imploring them to give their money. And a breakdown of that is really breaking down that sense of belonging, that you can count on someone helping you back up. And that's really breaking down in the West, among other factors. But in places like Africa, and I would say places like Italy and Greece and the Middle East, certain parts of it, religion is really pulling people together and pulling them up. I mean, I think the best example is that in parts of the Middle East, when there is conflict, you'll see people open up their doors because it is what their religion of, say, Islam would tell them to do, that they would help their neighbor, be kind to them, do unto others you have them do to yourself. That kindness implores them. And that kindness goes a long way. I wouldn't say it is equating the same to the overarching mental health issue, but it's certainly a massive boon to know that there are people who will help you simply because of their beliefs. There are people who will be on your side simply because of their beliefs, and that there's a chance there's a God who is ready to fight on your behalf and defend you. It's a massive boon. And then when it comes to economics, I will be honest, I'm not entirely too sure of the statistical nature. However, knowing how it pulls people together gives a better sense of community. I would say it prevents things such as burnout and gives purpose. If you're working all the time and don't have a purpose for that money, except for maybe to spend on yourself and enjoy it, it quickly loses the appeal because it's just human nature to want to help another person. And so here's something that is driving you to give that money to the poor, give that money to those in need, to help your fellow man or woman or other. That really is a boon to society and a boon to the individual. It gives you purpose for why you work. It gives you purpose for why you live. So that's personally my opinion of why I think it's so effective. But there's likely other opinions as well. But that's my opinion.
And Matthias, as a young adult, what do you think the government should do to promote positive mental health? Because like what you've mentioned earlier, your generation is the one that is really impacted by mental health issues, especially that we've just experienced the lockdown.
Yes, so specifically for my generation, there are a few things the government can do. Now, ultimately, it needs to be remembered that the government is not going to be the end-all be-all. I mean, there's nothing more terrifying than a government official saying, "I'm here to help," to quote good old Reagan, because usually they're just there to take more of your money. But there are things the government can do to enable people to get help. So a 988 hotline in Canada would direct people to a mental health emergency hotline. It's a simple, clean number that people can remember. That would save a lot of lives for people who are contemplating taking their life. Because we have thousands of people in Canada take their life each year, which is completely unnecessary. And it's not even just people who you would assume to be in need, like people who are going through a tough time or really have nowhere to go in life, as some prejudices would lead people to believe. I mean, there are people who are very successful, who are like the top of society, creme de la creme, and they will take their lives because they don't know what else to do. And that'll bring to the other part, education. That's a provincial concern in Canada and a state level in America. An education system that takes into account that mental health should be included in health education. That doctors should have a greater concern on that in their post-secondary education. Family doctors, I should say. and that schools should teach people how to enable it, because if individuals aren't willing to seek help and know the signs of when they need help, they're not going to show up for help. It's kind of like the old campaign, know the signs of a stroke. If you don't know what the signs of a stroke are, you may just think, oh, my head feels funny. My arm feels a little bit numb. I'll just sleep it off and take a little bit of whiskey. Which is, truth be told, what happened in a lot of cases when I was reading through this. But once that campaign for knowledge came out, people were starting going like, oh, this is a problem. Especially like the heart attack campaign. Like, oh, I'm feeling chest pain. I'll just sleep it off or something like that. Or I fell down the stairs and my head feels a little bit funny. I'll just sleep it off. If they don't know they're in trouble, people aren't going to seek help. And so teaching young people the signs of when they need help is key. And teaching them where to go for that help is also key. In addition to that, and I pull this back to the religious aspect, specifically here in my hometown, the mosque, it does a lot of outreach. I'm not particularly too sure which sect they are within Islam, but I do know that within Islam, helping other people is a major, major priority. And that is one that this mosque also does. And it's been reaching out to the community, doing community events, giving people a sense of belonging and helping them in their time of need, being a very compassionate outreach. And the same thing is for, in my hometown, church such as WLA, West London Alliance Church, a church that actively reaches out to the youth to help them if they need help. I mean, religion has a major role to play, whether or not you believe in it. I personally do. Religious groups are key because they give a sense of community and they are implored because of their beliefs to help people. And so if there's anything governments can do, such as giving them bigger leeway, giving them opportunities to reach out, or being set up as a source of assistance for mental health concerns. Of course, medical individuals should always take priority, but having them in that mix would be key, because at the end of the day, they will give aid. Without any question, they will help people. And I think that's a really, really strong message. I mean, from any group, from Sikhs to Muslims to Christians to Protestant Christians to Catholic Christians, all of them share that belief, as do many other religions, to help people. So I would ultimately say that involving those community groups is a key thing government can do.
Absolutely. Now, Matthias, you were also one of the speakers at two events, Peaceful Mind, where we actually originally met, and Stepping Stones for Positive Mental Health last February. So can you talk more about those events and what did you actually speak about?
Yes, so the Stepping Stones event, I remember speaking a lot to the economic concerns of that video call, especially with the work, I believe it was the Ugandan health minister, if I remember correctly, may have been Zambian, I can't quite remember, but he was a fantastic guy. He'd been health minister since 2015, deputy before that, and had done a lot of work in this country focusing on mental health. So, great gentleman. But the main thing I was speaking to is the bipartisan nature of this health crisis, because like that health minister, he was from the Social Democrat Party, a very progressive party, but his views aligned with mine, that mental health was an issue and that government has a role to play in solving it. Now, of course, it will differ from each group how they think it should be changed, and it'll differ from each individual to think how they'll be addressed, which is good, because I mean, the more time you have people talking about, the more awareness you get, and the better ideas you get. I mean, it's not like math where you solve the equation and be like, all right, that's the final answer. That is the answer. There's no debating that answer. I mean, 2 plus 2 equals 4. This isn't math. There is no clean cut perfect answer. There's always that gray area. And so having people come together to debate and figure out that perfect middle ground, air quotes perfect, to solve the issue, that's key, because it is an affliction of human nature, and only through emphasizing human solutions will you be able to solve it. And I just strongly believe that regardless of which political view you hold, that this is not a partisan issue, it's a bipartisan issue. that regardless of where you stand on, say, economics or where you stand upon things such as gun ownership, at the end of the day, what matters is your stance on helping people. Because if you want to help people, then you're in agreement with everyone else, regardless of political belief, that government has to do something, that people have to do something, community groups have to do something, that we have to work together to solve that issue.
And other than speaking at those events, do you have any other initiatives, or were there other initiatives that you were involved, whether during the lockdown or even before that, in relation to mental health?
Yes, I have a couple of them. And I would say the two major ones that I would like to speak to are new ones, actually. One of them is called Uplift Ontario and Hope Sisters, both very uplifting and hopeful groups, as the names imply. Uplift Ontario, I helped found that one. I helped create the logos, the branding, all that kind of good stuff. They focus on working with governments to create solutions to the homelessness crisis and ultimately the health crisis that afflicts a lot of people who are homeless. So a very niche subsect of the mental health crisis, but very important one, because in that situation, you are dealing with usually the most severe side effects of mental health, of depression, isolationism, abandonment. I mean, it's really a tough place they're in, arguably the worst you could suffer, as no one cares about your suffering. No one's there to listen to you. And certainly no one's there going to give you a helping hand. You are on your own. Even if you want help, chance of you getting it is slim to none. It is the worst situation to be in. And so seeing youth come together, because it is a youth organization, Uplift Ontario, across the province, come up with policies and ideas to meet with MPs and MPPs to address the issues, to put forward ideas, organizing care baskets, volunteering actively at soup kitchens and at homeless shelters. I mean, tangible efforts you can do to help people. Because that's ultimately the solution to mental health, is helping people. Because at some point, your ability to help yourself runs out. And at some point, you need someone to step up and help you. Like, if anything else, I just want to emphasize the solution to mental health is help. And that's what Uplift Ontario personifies. And Hope Sisters. It's a charity founded by the Aurora Sisters, I believe from Mississauga. And they do a great work. I mean, during the pandemic, a lot of senior citizens were facing isolationism and sorrow because they couldn't visit people and they were alone. And so what they wrote was letters of care. They individually wrote hundreds of letters to give out to those who aren't receiving any communication with anyone. The chance just to speak to another human being and felt heard and feel not alone. That was an important thing to combat in mental health. And that was directly meant to combat the mental health issues caused by the lockdown. And they continue to do that. I mean, they're currently working on an initiative that I'm helping them with called Hope Walls, where communities will set up walls for people to share messages of hope and encouragement to other people. I mean, for them, their cause is to build community in a compassionate community. And honestly, I feel like that's another good way for charities to actively help fight the mental health crisis, is through helping them feel not alone, to remind them they're not alone, that there's help for them. And actually, I'll say a third one as well. Another one would be Trek for Teens, because they are a group that focuses on teens who are homeless specifically, and the mental health issues as well surrounding them. They are also a great charity because they also actively take on the idea that the best way to solve mental health is to help people and actively do something about it. So they will continually send out volunteers, and I help them organize events to charities, to different homeless shelters, to different groups, to really just help them in any way they can through that manpower and through awareness as well. They are a big one that really focuses on the education and awareness aspect among the youth, which makes them a bit more unique. But all three of them are valuable. All three of them focus on their little niche sector, as do the other couple I'm involved in. But all of them are actively focusing on helping people. So it's an honor to be part of them, honestly.
Yeah, they really sound like incredible organizations. So I'll also put the link on those on the description of those organizations that you've been part of. Now, you've been actively involved when it comes to advocating for mental health. But personally, Matthias, how do you look after your own mental health, especially now that we're living in political uncertainty?
So for me, the way I do it is always by having certainty, because there are steps you can take. I mean, every morning, I reason why my hair is wet is just I came back from the gym, so every morning I will work out and set out personal goals for myself to uh, focus on of myself, like focusing on how I can help myself and better myself. So going to the gym every morning, running for like 30 minutes on the treadmill, and then doing weightlifting, things that I can measure my progression through fitness, and usually reading, say, a book a week or a book every 2 weeks. Sometimes it's hard to do the book a week, but focusing on trying to continually better myself. Because if you continually feel you're becoming better and becoming a stronger version of yourself, that really gives you a strong, resilient state to be in. Because as soon as you fall into that sense of you are continually degrading mentally and physically, that does have a serious impact on your mental health. I mean, obviously, it's not the end all be all, and say if something traumatic were to happen or something were to really affect me, I mean, pre workout and a few reps of dumbbells are not going to fix that. But it gives you a strong, resilient stance, in my opinion. So that's personally how I do it. But I would say ultimately, if push came to shove, to focus on mental health is keep on going back to this thing, is seeking help and reaching out for help. Because ultimately, you cannot lean upon your own strength. You have to lean upon others sometimes. And more often than not, people will be more than willing to help you.
Absolutely. It's really good that you've emphasized that for those who are, find these political uncertainties distressing, that they should seek the help of a mental health professional. But otherwise, any form of escapism, be it exercise or just, entertaining yourself, even with Netflix, that could potentially help your mental health. Now, Matthias, we now live in an era of knowledge transmission. There's so many resources that talks about mental health and how to look after yourself. But what do you think are some of the misconceptions about mental health that you think, in spite of those availability of resources, those misconceptions are still widespread?
Oh, that one's easy. Because this one's very simple in that regard. The major misconception and is that you have to solve it yourself, that you are on your own, and that it's a you problem, that you just have to, like, air quotes, man up, or you just have to focus on yourself because no one wants to hear your problems and no one will care. I mean, people do care. There was a time perhaps when people didn't. I argue against that. I argue that was people's self-doubt speaking rather than the reality of the matter, because people are compassionate. Generally speaking, there are, of course, always going to be bad people in the world, but for the majority of the time, you're going to meet good people. You're going to meet people who are kind, who just want to live their lives. But if they see someone in need, they're going to help them. I mean, great example is if there's say someone gets hit by a car in, say, the middle of Toronto, like a terrible situation, people aren't just going to keep on walking. They're going to stop what they're doing, regardless if they're in a rush, regardless if they're late for work, something like that. And they're going to go help the person. I'll be willing to bet money on that right now. That will happen, because it will happen. People will be running to help because they care about their fellow human being, their fellow citizen, their fellow Canadian, or their fellow American, or fellow Canadian, United Kingdom. They always will help their fellow. And so the major misconception is that you're alone and no one cares about you, and your concern is, I feel, the most dangerous one, and one that people need to focus on writing as a wrong, because it is afflicting everyone, regardless of generation.
Now, Matthias, we're already coming towards the end of this interview, and we've learned a great deal about the advocacy that you're doing. So, for the last few questions that I saved for you, I just want to hear the human side of Matthias. So, the first thing that I want to ask you is, what would you say are the highlights of your mental health advocacy so far?
So highlight thus far. Can't say this interview. This is great, but I would say like the biggest thing that I was able to be a part of, although I'd say two things. So the indirect one was the advocacy for the 988 number in Canada for a mental health hotline for people to call if they're in need of mental health. Like that is a major stepping stone and a major thing we can focus on across the world, is just addressing mental health as a health emergency. So have an emergency line dedicated to that. It's simple and easy to use with government staff trained and ready prepared to answer it, not just volunteers with other organizations who are, though fantastic, usually have very long phone numbers, easy to forget phone numbers, very complicated phone numbers, and uncertain hours. Whereas having a government set organization means there are standards 24/7 that they will be there to help them. So that was like a major one indirectly. And that's a direct one I was able to help with. I won't give their name, but there was one individual that we came across in South London when I was going door to door handing out flyers, and they needed help. I mean, they were really mentally down on their luck. They'd been kicked out by their parents due to their sexual orientation, and really just were stuck. And so what we did is we did what anyone else would do when we helped them. We helped them get some opportunities for a job. We were able to get them a place to stay for a while, and I think it was 3 months we were able to get for rent for them, paid for them. Landlord was very nice. Help them get back on their feet, help them get back in society, and find a place in society and remind them that they're not alone, that people care about them. Because the biggest thing you can do for people in that situation is remind them that they are cared for, that we care for them, that someone cares for them. That although their parents may have betrayed their duty as a parent to them, that we will not betray our duty to them as a fellow Canadian, that we will be there for them, to help them. And we're happy to say that they're doing quite well at this point in time. They're working a job, getting back and trying to finish their high school diploma through I think it's called CGEP or EB. I'm not specifically too sure of the exact terminology, but it's the way you complete your high school diploma after you've already finished the out of the age gap where you can complete a high school diploma, and working towards a place in society that will give them purpose and passion. I mean, abandonment is the worst situation. So helping someone in their worst time, remind them that they are cared for, I think is really the proudest one I've been a part of thus far. And I'm happy to say that groups like Hope Sisters and Uplift Ontario are consistently helping those kind of people every day. So, and I've been able to be part of them, so indirectly helping those people as well. So I would say those two, technically three cases of advocacy are my favorite thus far, because they're not really even advocacy, they're just affirmative actions of helping people. So I would say mental health in action, if you want to call it that. I don't even know if that's a proper statement, but I feel that really sums it up for me.
Yeah, that really sounds incredible. And Matthias, you've already probably mentioned this earlier, but I just want to highlight again, what's the biggest learning since you started your mental health advocacy? What have you discovered along the way?
I would say I'd say there's two, because I first came really across the sheer scale of the mental health crisis when I was going door to door, asking people for their vote, and then eventually asking them how are they doing and trying to figure out what their situation is, trying to learn about it. So I say the first one is that the state is made up of the provinces. The provinces are made up of municipalities. Municipalities are made up of the families. The families are made up of the people. The people are fundamentally the cornerstone of them all. If the people, the individual, is not strong, then how can the government, the state, be strong? Both need to be strengthened through one another. It's like a circle. That was the first realization, that you can't just elect a good, strong government and hope that everyone will be happy, content, and the economy will roaring again. Like, it's not that simple. Each person has a part to play, and just because there's a piece of paper signed in Ottawa does not mean everything's going to be good and dandy out in, say, Mississauga or in London. It's ultimately just a piece of paper signed in a different city that people will then enforce through police. It's you need to focus on helping the people rather than just guiding them as a government. So that was the first major realization, and I feel kind of silly that it took me that long to figure it out, but I have figured it out. I think the second major thing I have learned, um, it's that people don't realize that there are things that they can do to address it. They just think they can troop through it. I mean, obviously, getting help is the number one thing to do, but also focusing on self help, such as bettering yourself every day, like I do, is a great thing to do. But ultimately, seeking help is the number one way that people seem to just be ignore all the time, because people will talk about how they feel alone, they feel there's nothing to do, and then their reaction will be, maybe I just need a new hobby, maybe I just need to talk to my ex again. Do not do that. Reaching out for help is ultimately the best thing you can do, and just seeing how widespread the ignorance that the solution was, not because of their own wrongdoing, but because of the government's wrongdoing or government's own ignorance of the issue, is people just don't realize that other people care and that other people want to help them in their time of need. So that was, I say, a sad realization I came across.
Absolutely. And Matthias, if money was not an issue, what would you spend it on? Is there a particular project in mind?
Ooh, money is not an issue. So I assume this is coming from like a personal stance rather than as if you were prime minister question. Unlimited money. I would say you could spend it on charities, but ultimately I would say I would use it for funding community groups, which ultimately does mean charities, but now it's kind of like a backhanded way to say it. But community groups such as legions, or on churches, or on mosques, because ultimately with unlimited money, those people are going to pursue their passion, which more often than not is given back to the community. So it's a very cyclical cycle. And to quote pretty much anyone who's ever been in government, $5 in the hand of a Canadian is worth 30 in the hand of government. I mean, it's worth far more when it's in the hands of people, because they know what they need the best and they know what they want to do with the best. So giving that money back to community groups that know what they can do best to help the community would be the best way to do it. So I would say try and give it to as many projects as possible. Each one has their own unique flavor. Each one has their own unique goal. Some of them focus on mental health, some of them don't. But at the end of the day, they all want to help. And that's what's important. So maybe I would say give them the direction of focusing on mental health, but ultimately give them to every community group possible. Because at the end of the day, they're going to help people. They're going to help the community. They're going to help strengthen society and strengthen the individual. Because wouldn't it be just so great to go outside and say you're feeling down and alone and depressed, but then realize you can go to, say, a community event going on at the church, meet some new people, make some new friends. Obviously, in some cases, it's not going to solve mental health issue. I mean, obviously, medical professionals are number one, but having the opportunity to say, I can go to a church and find that sense of belonging, community, and passion, or go to a mosque, or go to the Sikh temple, etc., etc., and just know that there are events running all the time. And many churches already do that, or many mosques already do that, and I believe Sikh temples do as well. Just having those community groups and religious groups able to fully exercise their passion for helping people, I think would be the best route possible, as well as, of course, research into mental health. But I really think the active doing and active helping is such a powerful message.
Well, hopefully you get that money to fund those exciting projects that you're thinking of, Matthias. But is there a particular individual who has the greatest influence to your work, or a piece of writing that really, resonates with you?
Ooh, good question. Well, I would certainly say an individual who greatly affects my thinking would be Pierre Poilievre. He is a shadow minister for finance here in Canada, who really emphasizes the strength of the individual, helping the individual, enabling the individual, focusing on the individual. And that applies for economic to mental health. I mean, just really focusing on the little guy. And that kind of thinking, I think, is key, because too often people try to get all caught up in the idea of, say, macroeconomics, the state. Think about the balanced budget. Think about the province's budget, really ignoring the person. So really seeing a political leader focus on the individual and the role they play in society, I think is refreshing, because too often you see these politicians in Ottawa or in London, England, focusing on those big picture ideas and forgetting the details, forgetting the people involved in it. And so I see that really affected me in focusing how to create an approach that focuses on people. So that would be a big personal impact. In terms of a book, there are a couple books, I would say, but I would say maybe a weird one, but I would say Niccolo Machiavelli's Discourse on Livy. Not Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, certainly not. That's not a solution to mental health. But the Discourse on Livy, it's a very little known book. It's 450 pages that really focuses, ironically, on the beauty of democracy, on the beauty of the little guy, and the beauty of people, which is a very strange book to have issued by someone such as Niccolo Machiavelli. But of course, it goes into the whole philosophical debate of whether or not Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince was satirical, and that he was never even a tyrant advocate. He was just making a satire piece, which is quite plausible, and I think is quite plausible and quite correct. But in the Discourse on Livy, just seeing how you can create a state that focuses on helping the people, for the people, by the people, is just a fascinating concept. Of course, I wouldn't call that a blueprint for our society today. I mean, Niccolo Machiavelli is arguably a very incorrect individual, but just seeing that concept of how he covered historically that all the way back in time, even then people were focusing on the idea of community. This Discourse on Livy focuses on the Roman Republic, a very ancient society. They're focusing on the concept of community and belonging even back then. May or may not have been aware they're focusing on mental health, but indirectly were, by giving them that sense of community. Very crude version of mental health aid back then. And that was something that was very perfected by the Republic, and something that Machiavelli compliments the Republic for achieving. So again, not an advocate for Machiavelli by any stretch of the term. He's quite the unique individual, but certainly advocate for what he covers as a historian in the Discourse of Livy. That idea of a republic is made up of the people, and that there is no pure or righteous version of a state than that which is by the people, for the people. Because that ultimately means you will focus on all issues, from focusing on mental health to focusing to poverty. I mean, it just captures the beauty of what helping other people can do. So I would say that's one that not really affected me, but one that just really showed me that this isn't a new idea. This is a time-tested idea that helping other people is evident from even earliest of days.
Absolutely. And Matthias, if you weren't a mental health advocate, what would you have pursued in your life?
So, well, I would say probably a fool. If I weren't a mental health advocate, I'd be a fool. Because first and foremost, what brought me into it was that desire to help people through electing a government that would really balance the budget, bring back the economy, end this job crisis and this inflation crisis. If I were ignoring the mental health crisis, I'd be ignoring a key fundamental cornerstone for progress in Canada. You can't have a positive change without a positive mental health. And you cannot end the health crisis without ending the mental health crisis. So if I wanted to try and fix that, without focusing on mental health, there would be no chance. I would fall flat in my face and fail, as so many governments have before, because they try to solve all these issues and then fail because they fail to realize that the fundamental problem wasn't that they couldn't do something like balance the budget. It's that they weren't actively focusing on helping the people, putting in place programs that focused on helping the people. So I'd say if I weren't a mental health advocate, I would be most certainly a fool.
And Mattias, finally, the floor is all yours. Tell us what else is in the pipeline, and if people wanted to reach out to you, what platforms can they get in touch with you at?
Yes, well, they can most certainly reach out to me on LinkedIn for further clarification on my comments or further wanting to get in touch with me. Of course, they can also reach out to me via email, which I will give to you so you can provide to them. And I would just say, the final thing I will just say is that when it comes back to this overarching theme, and I will keep on saying this, is that the key to solving mental health is realizing you need to seek help. If you do not first seek help, then no one can help you. And that's just the point I'm just going to keep on driving home, because that's really a key precipice for solving mental health crisis, is that it can be anything, it can be overconfidence, ignorance of the signs of mental distress, or anything. There are so many factors that would disable an individual from realizing that they need help. And so enabling them to recognize the signs and enabling them to make that conscious decision to seek help, I think, is key. The key cure to mental health is first realizing we need help. Before that, you can't do anything. So I would say that's a point I really want to hammer home. And I will add this as well, that if you feel like you're passionate about this, get involved. I mean, regardless of who you are, there's going to be a local community group. There's going to be a local group such as the church, the mosque, the Sikh temple, or Buddhist temple, from whichever part of the world you are. I'm not an expert on all the world religions, but I know there are a few of them. And I know for a fact, vast majority, if not all of them, focus on helping people. So get involved with them if you're religious, and if not, get involved in the charity. There's going to be a local charity that cares about people, cares about helping people. And going back to what I said about Niccolo Machiavelli's History of the Republic, this isn't a new concept that a strong state relies upon helping other people. Again, Niccolo Machiavelli, not a stand-up guy, but the concept he covers is very tried and true in the history of the discourse on living. That even back to the day of the Roman Republic, they realized that helping people, that a sense of community, was key. And that to this day, that still rings true, because people are still people. People need help, and it's not a bad thing to ask for help, which is something we've realized and should have realized earlier in our modern day. That there is no shame in asking help, but there is certainly shame in not asking for help. Because if you try relying upon yourself all the time, then you're doing a disservice to yourself. You're doing an injustice to yourself, because sometimes you just need that helping hand.
Absolutely. Those are an incredible message when it comes to mental health. And I'm also pleased to hear that, a young person such as yourself is encouraging, other people to be actively involved when it comes to mental health. Well, Mattias Vanderley, it's a pleasure having you here on the DRH show, but unfortunately, our time is up. I look forward to hearing more about your work.
Yeah, well, thank you. And I greatly appreciate you letting me on.